Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be going over someone who is not super well known, but for those who do know him, he is known as the father of advertising. David Ogilvy launched some of the most famous marketing campaigns of the 20th century and is just one of those people who is truly remarkable in their field. Starting out from being a door-to-door salesman to going and launching his company Ogilvyisms, he did campaigns for people like Rolls-Royce, Dove, Hathaway, and Shell Oil. And from his experience, he is able to give us an absolute marketing masterclass. As this lecture series is meant to study the great people of history in order to build a better future, what better person to study than one of the greatest marketers in history? So I think that's it for the intro. Let's dive into the life of David Ogilvy.
Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact.
I've lost my mind on this game, yeah. Like Vincent Van Gogh.
Every set that I did and more weights that I lifted, I get one step closer to turning that vision into reality.
Offer me money, offer me power, I don't care.
Dedicated his life to his art and lost his mind in the process.
Because everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you.
First of all, I'm not sponsored, but we're gonna have some Celsius. Orange flavor. Thirsty. Okay, let me set the scene a little bit with a quote that I think really describes his entire life pretty much. David Ogilvy was born in 1911 in West Horsley, England. Educated at Fettes College, Edinburgh, and Christ Church, Oxford, he started his career as an apprentice chef in the kitchens of the Hotel Majestic in Paris. He went on from Paris to sell stoves in Scotland and later emigrated to America to become associate director of Dr. George Gallup's Audience Research Institute at Princeton. During the Second World War, Mr. Ogilvy was on Sir William Stephenson's staff in British security coordination. After the war, he founded the advertising agency known today as Ogilvy and Matter. And of course, this is a company that would become his huge marketing agency, one of the top ones in the world, and it's what really made him famous. Now, the interesting thing about this book is that it's not really a biography. It's called The Confessions of an Advertising Man by David Ogilvy, and it's pretty much everything that he learned from a lifetime of marketing. And so he's going over a lot of his experiences, and he's just conveying the lessons that he's learned from running his business. He starts by answering the question, why did I write this book? Why did I write it? First, to attract new clients to my advertising agency. Second, to condition the market for a public offering of our shares. Third, to make myself better known in the business world. It achieved all three of these purposes. My colleagues at Ogilvy and Matter have largely followed my precepts and have sold a lot of products for a lot of manufacturers, with the result that our agency is now 60 times as big as it was when I wrote this book. Instead of one office and 19 clients, we now have 3,000 clients and 267 offices, including 44 in the United States. So obviously, David is a very, very successful man. He then says, if I were writing it today, it would be less indiscreet, less boastful, and less didactic. You will find that it is full of rules. Do this, do that. Don't do the other thing. Advertising people, particularly the young ones, are allergic to rules. Today, I would not say never set copy in reverse. I would say research shows that when you set copy in reverse, nobody will read it. A more tactful formula in our permissive society. And one thing that I love about this is that throughout this entire book, you can tell that he's just a master of psychology. He's a master at reading humans, and he understands how the human mind works. One thing that sets David apart is that he just understands so much because he reads a lot. He reads these studies from the top colleges that are happening, and he's just able to apply that to the real world, to the marketing world. And so it's this thirst for knowledge that really gives him the edge in the market, and I think that's something that we can all take from him. This story begins at a time when David is working at a kitchen in Paris, and this isn't just your average kitchen in Paris. This is like a big, very nice, very fancy restaurant. It's an extremely competitive field, and at this time, he's just observing the people around him, trying to learn as much as he can, trying to learn from all the people who are competing in this field. And so while he's at this kitchen, he's just observing these patterns and really taking in as much information as he can. And this is the information that he got. Every man Jack was inspired by one ambition: to cook better than any chef had ever cooked before. Our esprit de corps would have done credit to the Marines. So as you can see, he's in an extremely competitive environment with people working very hard around him. And the most hardest working person, the best cook, the leader, was this guy named Chef Bitard. Chef Bitard was truly great, and even when Ogilvy was young, you can tell that he recognizes greatness when he sees it, and so he really looks up to this guy. This is what he says about him. To begin with, he was the best cook in the whole brigade, and we knew it. It was inspiring to work for a supreme master. Inspiring to work for a supreme master. And you see this later in his life too, when he's the master of advertising. He's trying to be that leader. He's trying to imitate this guy who he looked up to for so long, who he was working for. And he really looks upon this guy very fondly, even though he was forced to work extremely hard. There's actually a lot of these lessons that he learns in the kitchen that he's going to apply later in his life when he's leading the marketing agency. And you see this as a trend in this chapter of the book when he's talking about the kitchen. It says, Empetard praised very seldom, but when he did, we were exalted to the skies. Today, I praise my staff as rarely as Petard praised his chefs, in the hope that they too will appreciate it more than a steady gush of appreciation. So, huge lesson there, that if you just keep appreciating your employees all the time, they're eventually going to get used to it. It's not going to mean anything. When you give out results here and there, when they actually do something good, then they get that dopamine spike and then comes down to normal level. Where if you're just all the time complimenting them, then that's going to be the baseline level. This is something he also applies to speaking. He only chooses to speak in public when he has something important to say, when he has something that's going to break the internet. And if he doesn't have anything to say, then he just doesn't talk. This way, the things that he actually does say are impactful, they're meaningful, and they really hit because he's not just speaking all the time. So imagine yourself in a social scenario. Think about how much you're speaking. Think about how impactful the words that you're saying are. And you might find that you might be speaking too much to where your words have no impact. I find that people who work in my agency get a similar charge out of state occasions. When a crisis keeps them working all night, their morale is high for weeks afterward. Napoleon was actually constantly marching his troops around, even though he didn't have to, because he believed that inactivity bred laziness. He knew that when he made his soldiers work, they would be more charged up. And so even before big battles, he would go around Italy and conquer these small armies, and by the time they got to the bigger armies, they already had multiple victories under their belts and did not have any slice of inactivity. He continues to say, Empetard did not tolerate incompetence. He knew that it is demoralizing for professionals to work alongside incompetent amateurs. And again, it's just these lessons that repeat and over again throughout history. Steve Jobs did the exact same thing. Steve Jobs believed in only hiring A players because any B player on the team would bring everyone down. He knew that if you made an A player work with a B player, the A player would be more demoralized and would work less. And so he was ready to sacrifice any B player that tried to get into Apple for the betterment of the entire team. This chef did the exact same thing. He did not tolerate incompetence. He knew that professionals did not want to work along amateurs, and so he only hired the best. I found my 63 hours bending over a red-hot stove so exhausting that I had to spend my day off lying on my back in a meadow looking at the sky. But Petard worked 77 hours a week and took only one free day a fortnight. This is about my schedule today. I figure that my staff will be less reluctant to work overtime if I work longer hours than they do. Oh my, this is just so great. If you want your team to be working long hours, then you have to work those exact same hours and more. This again goes back to Napoleon. Napoleon would be in the battle positioning cannons himself in the beginning. His own soldiers literally called him Le Petit Commander, which was pretty much just a way of calling him one of them. And so when they saw him positioning cannons, when they see David Ogilvy putting in more hours than them, and when David Ogilvy saw his chef putting in more hours than him, they were inspired to work harder because they knew that someone else believed in what they were trying to do, that they were willing to go all the way. He says, in the advertising industry, to be successful, you must, of necessity, accumulate a group of creative people. This probably means a fairly high percentage of high-strung, brilliant, eccentric nonconformists. Like most doctors, you are on call day and night, 7 days a week. If you want to build something truly brilliant in the world, you're going to have to put in those hours. You're going to have to work all the time. You're going to have to put in your team only A players and have those A players on call 24/7. A lot of people might look at this as a bad thing, like you're overworking or you're working way too hard. But in reality, the point is to work so hard on something because you believe in the thing that you're trying to build, because you believe in the mission, and you want your employees to feel the same thing. It shouldn't be a grudge to get to work. It should be, I want to get to work so that we can accomplish this thing together. And when you build that morale among your employees, you're able to sort of align everyone's vision together and really build something unique so that everyone wants to build it. The truly great people in the world are the people who are able to align people's vision together to a common goal. This is what David Ogilvy did with his marketing company. So now he's done with all the chef analogies, he's done talking about his kitchen time, and he begins to talk about running his own marketing company. He begins by talking about his own role at the company. He says, running an agency takes vitality and sufficient resilience to pick oneself up after defeats, affection for one's henchmen and tolerance for their foibles, a genius for composing sibling rivalries, and a unerring eye for the main chance, and morality. People who work in advertising agencies can suffer serious blows to their esprit de corps if they catch their leader in acts of unprincipled opportunism. Above all, the head of an agency must know how to delegate. And so one thing he goes back to time and time again in this book is that you have to have the top people and you have to understand how to delegate work to them. As the leader of the group, you are a vision setter. You are defining direction of the company, but the people under you have to all be supporting that vision and you have to learn how to delegate work to them. You then have this beautiful quote about excellence. I have no ambition to preside over a vast bureaucracy. This is why we only have 19 clients. The pursuit of excellence is less profitable than the pursuit of bigness, but it can be more satisfying. Wow. The pursuit of excellence is less profitable than the pursuit of bigness. Oftentimes we think that if you simply make the best products, if you simply are the best, you will make the most money and you will be the biggest. But what David Ogilvy is saying is actually the opposite. He says the pursuit of excellence is often less profitable. And it's really true. You saw when Steve Jobs invented the Macintosh, it was this amazing new computer, brilliant new technology, but at the end of the day, it didn't sell as well as it should have. And this was because it was way too expensive. And although Steve Jobs achieved something close to excellence, it wasn't really a financial success. And this is what David is getting at here. Sometimes you're going to have to give up the financial opportunity in order to pursue what's truly meaningful, what will truly change the world, and that would be something approximating excellence. Then you have this quote about keeping a line open towards the unconscious mind, which I think is very powerful indeed. I am almost incapable of logical thought, but I have developed techniques for keeping open the telephone line to my unconscious in case that disorderly repossessionary has anything to tell me. I hear a great deal of music. I am on friendly terms with John Barleycorn. I take long, hot baths. I garden. I go into the retreat among the Amish. I watch birds. I go for long walks in the country. And I take frequent vacations so that my brain can lie fallow. No golf, no cocktail parties, no tennis, no bridge, no concentration, only a bicycle. While thus employed in doing nothing, I receive a constant stream of telegrams from my unconscious, and these become the raw material for my advertisements. But more is required: hard work, an open mind, and ungovernable curiosity. Wow. An ungovernable curiosity. This is actually something that you don't hear a lot in the modern world, where they tell you to just work all day, every single day, 24/7 for your entire life. When in reality, a lot of the great people of history just didn't do that. A lot of them really did make time for breaks, to give their mind a chance to relax and to let the unconscious flow ideas into their brain. I think out of everyone who can relate to this most from history, one person in particular that comes to mind is Walt Disney. Walt Disney actually, later in his life, had lots of hobbies. He actually liked horseback riding a lot, and so he would go horseback riding, and he would just let sort of his creative mind flow. He would let ideas come to him. Arnold as well, he had cycles. He had times when he was working 24/7, sure, but then he also had times when he sort of relaxed a little bit. He partied a little bit more, and he just gave his mind a time to relax. It's really during this time when ideas sort of cement in your head and new ones are able to grow and flourish and become something. It's in these times of rest where you're really able to dive deep into the creative part of your mind, the unconscious, and I think that's what David Ogilvy is getting at here. In the modern world of business, it is useless to be a creative, original thinker unless you can also sell what you create. Management cannot be expected to recognize a good idea unless it is presented to them by a good salesman. Wow, this is still a problem today. Keep in mind, this is all during the 20th century, and these problems are still recurring today. This exact advice from decades ago is literally the exact problems that you will still face today, and this is why history is so valuable, but this problem in particular really sticks out today. Lots of people are chasing their passion. They're chasing what they love, but they can't sell it. They don't know who to pitch it to. They don't know how to pitch. If you have a unique talent, a unique skill set, something that you want to put out in the world, you have to be able to sell it. You have to learn how to market the idea. You have to learn how to market yourself. And so you have to take yourself emotionally out of it for a second and look at it objectively from the viewpoint of another person. You can't expect anyone to recognize your genius if you are not being a good salesman. You have to sell your idea. A lot of the times the world will try to reject your ideas. They will try to reject your creativity, and you simply have to stay in there like a rock and pitch like you've never pitched before. And so it is useless to be a creative. It is useless to be a creative unless you can sell what you create. Finally, I have observed that no creative organization, whether it is a research laboratory, a magazine, a Paris kitchen, or an advertising agency, will produce a great body of work unless it is led by a formidable individual. This one's big. At the end of the day, an organization cannot be led by two heads. There has to be one person at the top making all the decisions, leading everyone. It has to be sort of like a guiding light. There is always one person at the top of the pyramid. Even in a lot of partnerships that you see in history, there's still one person with the vision, and the other one is sort of the techie guy behind the scenes. You can think of Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, or Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, or, well, I can't think of anyone else, but there's usually one person guiding the vision, and then another person sort of behind the scenes. And with big organizations, there just simply has to be one person at the top. At one point, David is writing back to a colleague that wrote to him, and this is what he says in the letter. Few of the great creators have bland personalities. They are cantankerous egoists, the kind of men who are unwelcome in the modern corporation. Consider Winston Churchill. He drank like a fish. He was capricious and willful. When he opposed, he sulked. He was rude to fools. He was widely extravagant. He wept on the slightest provocation. His conversation was Rabelaisian. He was inconsiderate to his staff. Yet Lord Ellenbrook, his chief of staff, would write, "I shall always look back on the years I worked with him as some of the most difficult and trying ones in my life. For all that, I thank God that I was given the opportunity to work alongside of such a man, and having my eyes open to the fact that occasionally such supermen exist on this earth." So I love this because he actually has this other quote that says, "Tolerate genius." A lot of times, geniuses are hard to work with. They are egotistical, they're arrogant, they don't want to listen to anyone. They'll actually speak their opinion. And so they're very disagreeable people. It's hard to work with them. But that's why I like this little maxim that says, tolerate genius, tolerate genius, tolerate genius, because sometimes you just have to put up with people you disagree with because they're so good at what they do. I mean, I keep going back to Steve Jobs and Napoleon for some reason, but I mean, Steve Jobs, imagine what it must have been like working with him. He was yelling constantly. He was crying constantly. He was extremely passionate about what he did, and he was extremely passionate about what you did, down to the smallest detail. And he would probably get up in your face, and he would yell at you if you didn't know some detail of what you were working on. Same with Elon. Same with Napoleon, I'm sure. Same with most great people in history. They're going to be hard to work with, difficult to work with, and this is what David Ogilvy is getting at. And it's such a valuable lesson. It's such a great thing to keep in mind when trying to seek out these just great people in society. Okay, so now you get to the point where he's talking about lessons from his company, Ogilvy and Matter. He begins about talking about the life cycle of certain agencies, but it can also be applied to most businesses. He says, once every few years, a great new agency is born. It is ambitious, hardworking, full of dynamite. It gets accounts from soft old agencies. It does great work. The years pass. The founders get rich and tired. Their creative fires go out. They become extinct volcanoes. The agency may continue to prosper. Its original momentum is not yet spent. It has powerful contacts, but it has grown too big. It produces dull, routine campaigns based on the echo of old victories. Dry rot sets in. The emphasis shifts to collateral services to conceal the agency's creative bankruptcy. At this stage, it begins losing accounts to vital new agencies, ruthless upstarts who work hard and put all their dynamite into their advertisements. Wow, so this is fantastic because it can literally apply to so much. It can apply to people. It can apply to organizations. It can even apply to countries. I mean, just think about it. Every once in a while, a new country is born. They're small, but they're hard workers. They have good morals. They have great philosophies, and they quickly rise to the top through innovation, through hard work, through good morals at the end of the day. These nations prosper for a little bit and they get very rich, and this is when something bad begins to happen. It may prosper for a little bit, but it gets lazy, and at a certain point, dry rot sets in. Think about what country this is happening to now. I think you guys all know where I'm getting at with this. But a more applicable thing is that this could also happen in your own life. You could be wildly hardworking and wildly successful when you're young, but after that, are you gonna get lazy? Are you going to be satisfied with what you have? Are you going to keep reaching for more when you already have enough? If you don't realize that self-improvement and trying to do better is a never-ending cycle, then eventually when you become lazy and fat, the new up-and-comers of the next generation will eat you up. An agency's first clients are the hardest to get because it has no credentials, no record of success, no reputation. At this stage, it often pays to speculate by conducting pilot survey on some aspect of your prospective's client's business. So this is really great because a lot of people struggle with that first hump, with that first step of getting money through the door, of getting a client through the door. And it's really simple. It's because you don't have a reputation built. You don't have a portfolio. You don't have anything to offer them. You're just some stranger door knocking, trying to sell something to someone who doesn't really know what you're selling. And so what he's getting at here is that you either have to go to a business already providing some value, conducting a sample survey or giving them a free consultation, or what you can do is offer free work, which is another way of adding value, so that you can then build a portfolio and build that reputation in the market and build that network and build that trust with the community. And that's going to be what's going to get you your first couple clients. And so pretty much after you get over this hump of getting that first sort of reputation, that first little bit of portfolio, after you get over that hump, which is a barrier of entry for really any field, competitive field out there. But once you get over that first little block, it is a huge amount of progress because most people don't. This next one's really just a great quote. Next to luck, fertility and midnight oil are the best weapons to use in hunting new business. At the end of the day, sometimes the key to your success is probably just going to be the hardest worker. The more cold calling you do, the more pitches, the more presentations you give, the more rejections you have even, the more failures that you face, the more you're going to be learning, because it's through those experiences, through that you learn a little bit each time and you get better. And so it is simply going to be the hardest worker who wins in the end. Handling accounts once you have gotten them is deadly serious business. You are spending other people's money and the fate of their company often rests in your hands. But I regard the hunt for new clients as a sport. If you play it grimly, you will die of ulcers. If you play it with a light-hearted gusto, you will survive your failures without losing sleep. Play to win, but enjoy the fun. I was actually talking to a founder the other day. He's actually the founder of Bianchi Candles, and he told me this very interesting quote. He said, "You should always be in stressful situations, but you should never be stressed. Play it like a game, because it is. It's a sport, and it's a competitive sport. And that's what makes it fun. You can operate and you can fail in a much more productive way when you look at it in this way." And then he goes on to talk a little bit about reputation. He says, "I never accept an account unless I believe that we can do a conspicuously better job than the previous agency." And so this one's difficult because a lot of times when you run ad, you're not entirely 100% sure that you can get results, especially if this is some of your first times. And so he says he never accepts an account unless he knows he can do better. This is really just a quote about protecting your reputation. Don't promise things that you know you're not going to be able to deliver on. Instead, tell them what you're going to be able to deliver on and then complete it. This trust that you're building with your client is very important, and it's going to be what's going to add value to your network and your relationships in the market. And that relationship, those relationships in the market is, in the end, what's really most important and what's going to make your business the most of a success. He also says, however hungry a new agency may be, it must have the self-restraint to turn down moribund accounts. A surgeon with an established practice can afford to have an occasional patient die on the operating table, but a young surgeon's whole career can be ruined by such a misadventure. I used to dread having one of our accounts die on our operating table. And so again, he's talking about how difficult it is just to start, because when you're just starting out, you cannot fail with a company. It might ruin your reputation. When you've had 100 successful marketing campaigns and you miss the 101st, it might not be a big deal. It's a little off there. But if you only have 2 successful marketing campaigns and the third one is a complete disaster, it might ruin all the credibility of the first 2. He talks a lot about reputation actually, and how important it is. About pursuing clients when other people are also pursuing them. He says, whenever we are revealed as one of the suitors, I withdraw from the contest. It is unwise to risk being publicly defeated. I like to succeed in public, but to fail in secret. So again, it's that reputation, that image that people have of you. You want to succeed in public and then fail in quiet so that you can simply learn from your failures and then succeed again in public. When people see you as a success and don't see any of the failures, there's a bit of magic there, a bit of magic that goes in their minds where they're like, how is that possible? And, they say that magic is just a gap in our understanding of things, and that's sort of what happens. People cannot possibly understand how you got to where you are because they just don't see all the failure that also came with it. And so when you don't show the failure, but you show the success, then that magic appears in their head. It is important to admit your mistakes and to do so before you are charged with them. I seized the earliest opportunity to assume the blame. Always take responsibility for everything, because that is the worst possible thing, but it's also the greatest possible thing. Because if it is your responsibility, then that means that it is your fault. But if it is your fault, then that also means that you are the only person that can fix it. If the world is truly against you, then there's nothing you can do about it. But the chances are that the world is not truly against you. And you might be doing something wrong that you can fix and then be on the good side again. There are so many great quotes in this book. Oh my, I'm having so much fun with this. Okay, let's keep going with another one. Surely, they say, these rules and regulations must result in dull advertising. Not so far, I reply, and I go on to preach on the importance of discipline in art. Shakespeare wrote his sonnets within a strict discipline, 14 lines of iambic pentameter, rhyming in 3 quatrains and a couplet. Were his sonnets dull? Mozart wrote his sonatas within an equally rigid discipline, exposition, development, and recapitulation. Were they dull? If you think Mozart and Shakespeare are dull, I don't know what you're thinking. What he's getting at here is that everything has rules, even creativity. And sometimes we stray so far from these rules and call it art when that's not really how it works. Think about any discipline. Think about soccer. Imagine if there were no rules in soccer. It would just be a bunch of people kicking a ball around with no point. When you have certain rules, it gives you the freedom to stretch those rules, but not really break them. For example, for a marketing campaign, you're always going to need a hook. That hook can be whatever you want it to be, whatever you think is the most creative or whatever works the best, whatever has the highest conversion rate, but you cannot completely take out the hook and change it with everything that comes after the hook. That would be an example of going completely off the rails, no rules or nothing. And so what he's trying to get at is that there are rules for a reason and that you should work within the lines, but bend the rules a little bit, not really throw them out. If you ever have the good fortune to create a great advertising campaign, you will soon see another agency steal it. This is irritating, but don't let it worry you. Nobody has ever built a brand by imitating somebody else's advertising. Imitation may be the sincerest form of plagiarism, but it is also the mark of an inferior person. Wow, I love that. Because especially in the social media game right now, there are a lot of people who simply follow the trend. And although they may get lots of views in the short term, they didn't create that trend. There's nothing there. They simply took someone else's work and made it their own. But at the end of the day, the spark, the creativity is still with the person who made it. And so they're going to have longer lasting success than simply a quick, sort of like a view grab. Think of it like a cash grab, but a view grab from the person who copied it. And so he even says the person who copies it is an inferior person to the one who created it. The point is, be a trendsetter, not a trend follower, because the trendsetters are the ones who have longevity. You should always include testimonials in your copy. The reader finds it easier to believe the endorsements of a fellow consumer than the puffery of an anonymous copywriter. This is just common sense, but people still make this mistake all the time. There is so much power in the testimonial of someone else. I mean, think about even religion. One of the reasons Christianity is wildly successful is because of other people's testimonies. It's just other people out in the world sharing their story, sharing their experience with a certain religion or a certain product or whatever it is. It's other people like you that share their story, and so you put yourself in the position of that person and then see what your life could be like with that product or that religion. And when you're with someone you trust, that testimony is so much more powerful than someone who's trying to sell you something. In television advertising, you have exactly 58 seconds to make your sale, and your client is paying $500 a second. Don't mess about with irrelevant lead-ins. Start selling in your first frame and never stop selling until the last. Television is the most powerful advertising medium ever invented. Success in using it depends more than anything else on your ingenuity in devising believable demonstrations. So Steve Jobs was actually the master at this. Every time he wanted to market his product, he simply demonstrated it. And because his product was so good, his demonstrations were powerful. When he was selling the Macintosh, he simply showed people how to use it. When he was selling the iPod, he simply took the iPod out of his pocket and told people that it could play music, and then it did. Even with things like the phone, he would get out on stage and then he would show people him using the phone. And so it was these demonstrations that made Steve Jobs one of the best marketers in the world. So a lot of these are just simply marketing lessons, but they also apply to human psychology. They apply to getting people to do what you want, which is ideally to buy a project. Hopefully nothing evil. But David Ogilvy is a people person, and one thing that he does well is understand people. I said this at the beginning of the episode. And so this next chapter is all simply about just how to rise to the top, how to be that person that succeeds in the company, how to be the best of the best. And I think this is where we can truly gain the most amount of value. After watching the careermanship of my own employees for 14 years, I have identified a pattern of behavior which leads rapidly to the top. First, you must be ambitious, but you must be not so nakedly aggressive that your fellow workers rise up and destroy you. You have to work well with others, otherwise people will take you down. You don't want to be in the position where Julius Caesar was, where he was killed by his own men. The person at the top is meant to motivate the people under him. They're meant to be a team working together on a mission. And so one of the biggest problems is that the person on the top becomes prideful. They think they're better. They think of the people below them as inferior. The problem with this is that no one wants to work with that person. People want to feel like they're part of something bigger, and when you make them feel bigger, then they get that sense of fulfillment. They get that sense of purpose in their lives, and this is what you really want to inspire in people. You want to bring the best out of them. And so if you bring the best out of them, if you make them feel like you're equal, then you will truly get a team together working on one mission. Claude Hopkins attributed his success to the fact that he worked twice as long hours as the other copywriters, and thus made his way up the ladder at twice their speed. One of the best agencies born in the last 40 years owes its supremacy to the fact that its founder was so unhappy with his wife that he rarely left the office before midnight. In my bachelor days, I used to work until the small hours. If you prefer to spend all your spare time growing roses or playing with your children, I like you better. But do not complain that you are not being promoted fast enough. Managers promote the men who produce the most. I love this. This guy is so funny. He is so funny, and he says things in a way where they'll hit you and they'll stay with you. A lot of the times, the people who have work-life balance are the happiest people. There's actually correlation between your commute time and your overall happiness in life. And so if you're a lot happier, you're probably a lot more pleasant to be around. But it's also more likely that if you spend those hours doing something else, you're probably not going to choose to be promoted over someone who is putting in those hours at night. Most of the times, the people who have the most success are simply the hardest worker. When Arnold wanted to be Mr. Olympia, he simply took all the other bodybuilders' routine and then doubled it. Instead of working out once a day, he would work out twice a day. Instead of taking days off, he would simply work out in a different way. Arnold was one of the people who was always trying to be the hardest worker in the room, and it is these type of people who will find the most success. Nowadays, it is the fashion to pretend that no single individual is ever responsible for a successful advertising campaign. This emphasis on teamwork is bunkum, a conspiracy of the mediocre majority. No advertisement, no commercial, and no image can be created by a committee. Most top managements are secretly aware of this and keep their eyes open for those rare individuals who lay golden eggs. These champions can no longer be rewarded on the Hopkins scale, but they are the only men in advertising agencies who are immune to the threat of dismissal in times of scarcity. They give value for the money. This is so great. This is another truth of life. You can think of it this way. The square root of the amount of individuals in an organization are going to be the people who produce I believe it's 50 or 80% of the work. And so when you have 4 people, it's not too bad because it would be 2 people doing most of the work. But when you have 100 people, it is 10. And so this really gets out of hand very fast. It is few people who really give the most output in the world. And so when you find one of these rare individuals, it's important that you recruit them immediately before someone else finds them. It is also by being one of these people that you will have job security forever, pretty much, even in times of scarcity when people are being let go. If you can provide actual value to a company, you have nothing to worry about. Most of the able young men who come into agencies nowadays are determined to become account executives, probably because they have been taught in business school that their mission in life is to manage and administer rather than to do specialist work. It escapes their attention that the heads of the 6 biggest agencies in the world were all specialists before they reached the top. 4 of them were copywriters, no one in media, and no one in research. Not one of them has ever been an account executive. It is much more difficult to make your mark as an account executive than as a specialist, because it is rare for an account executive to have the opportunity to cover himself with glory. Almost all these spectacular triumphs are performed by specialists. I would therefore advise my own son to specialize in media research or copy. He would find the competition less formidable in these departments, he would find more frequent opportunities to rise above routine maintenance work, and he would acquire an expertise which gives a man security psychologically and financially. This is another big one. Choose the job that gives you the most amount of responsibility and not the most amount of money. There was actually a point during the Revolutionary War where Alexander Hamilton was going to be promoted by George Washington, and Hamilton refused. Hamilton refused because he had more responsibility in a lower position than he would have had in that higher position, even though that higher position was one that came with a higher salary. And so the point here is that simply sometimes you might want to take that lesser position simply because you might be able to make more of a name for yourself. And of course, I have to throw in this quote because every single great person in history, I don't think I've heard of one that wasn't. They were all voracious readers and they all loved studying history. David was, of course, one of these people. It says, read a book every day, 21 books in 3 weeks. I assume that you have already taken the Book of the Month Club's rapid reading course and that you can do 1,000 words a minute. So not only was he a voracious reader, but he was an extremely fast reader and he could read very fast. And I know people might make the arguments of retention rates, how much do you actually retain from the reading if you're reading at that speed. But at the end of the day, some people really do have these crazy IQs that allows them to retain a crazy amount of information and also read very fast. The point is that these great people of history loved to read. They loved to learn. They were always learning. They were always reading. And so if you are always looking to learn and keep an open mind to everything you read, you're going to do just fine. The last part of the book is simply a collection of sayings from David Ogilvy, and he calls them Ogilvyisms. So I'm going to go over them and just reflect on each one for a bit, because each one, they're sort of like proverbs, and they're maxims that if you can just get in your head and get them to stick around in your heart, then you'll be able to implement them into your own lives. At the end of the day, throughout this lecture series, I'm going to be repeating a lot of the same lessons over and over again, and it's not about the complexity of these lessons, but it is more about applying these principles into your life and putting them into actions. They're simple principles. The rules to success are not difficult. It is simply about whether you are one of the people who are going to implement them into your life. Okay, let's do this. I believe in the Scottish proverb, hard work never killed a man. Men die of boredom, psychological conflict, and disease. They do not die of hard work. This one's so good. A busy mind is a healthy mind. And that doesn't mean you should be stressed. Always be in a stressful situation, but never be stressed. A man who is able to do hard work, honest work, and good work, someone who is actually able to provide value to society, is the healthiest individual possible. The most deadly disease oftentimes is narcissism, cynicism, and resentfulness. And by being an asset for the community, we're able to triumph over this virus and really, really live. It is important to admit your mistakes and do so before you are charged with them. Take on responsibility for your actions. This is one of the best lessons that you can take for your life. When you take responsibilities for your actions and your mistakes, it means that you are able to fix them. If you don't take responsibility for your actions, then there's nothing you can do about it, and the same things will hit you over and over again. Stay ahead of the curve, admit your mistakes, and fix them. Big ideas are usually simple ideas. People online repeat the same lessons over and over and over again, and we consume them like it's a brand new lesson every time we hear them. The most important lessons that we will ever hear in life are the most simple ones. It is simply about applying them, about execution, about making them manifest into reality. And so sometimes it's worth it to realize that we have all the knowledge we need, and now is the time to execute. In the best establishments, promises are always kept, whatever it may cost in agony and overtime. So good. Stick to your word. Don't say you're going to do something that you're not going to do. Your word, your reputation are some of the most valuable assets you will ever have. It is going to be what allows you to build relationships in the world, to build your network, to have successful relationships with clients. Always do your best to keep your promises no matter the cost. If you have to stay at the office until midnight for a couple weeks, it's worth it if you're able to keep your word. This is probably my favorite one. Tolerate genius. That's it. Tolerate genius. Oftentimes, the truly great people of society are hard to work with. The A players, they're disagreeable. They are hard to get along with. But at the end of the day, you want them on your side. And so if you do happen to stumble across one of these rare diamonds, then learn to work with them. Tolerate genius. We prefer the discipline of knowledge to the anarchy of ignorance. The discipline of knowledge. A lot of the times we are blindly ignorant. We choose to ignore our mistakes and live in that world when we don't have to. The problem is that admitting your mistakes is hard because it's painful. It's painful to admit that you're wrong. It's painful to admit that you messed up, and it's painful to learn something new because when you learn something new, you have to let an old idea die. And dying hurts. You have to prefer the discipline of knowledge, the discipline of letting that old idea die and that new idea come to fruition. This is the true way to succeed. And the last one, which I just think is so amazing because this guy throughout this entire book is so funny, and you can tell that he's just a very fun, caring guy. And so at the end of the book, he ends it with this. I admire people with gentle manners who treat other people as human beings. It kind of reminds me of this other quote where it's actually from a TV show. It says, in the pursuit of greatness, we failed to do good. And I think it's important to understand that not all great people are good people. And so is it worth it to do something great, to do something that few people have ever done before if it's not a good thing to do? We can lose ourselves in the work, we can lose ourselves in the chaos, and it's very easy to do that. But it's good to remember that it's all aimed towards something higher than ourselves, whether it's to understand more or to help the people around us. We must remember to not lose ourselves in the pursuit of greatness. And I think the true way to do that, the true thing that David has been acknowledging in this book is to have a good name, have a good reputation, build solid relationships. And it's that relationships with the world, with the people around us, that really is where success in business truly lies. And so I'm going to repeat that quote one more time just because I think it's so great. I admire people with gentle manners who treat other people as human beings. So yeah, those are the teachings of David Ogilvy. Guys, I learned so much from reading this book. It is such a good read. This guy talks, it's in such a funny way. He has so many jokes and he writes these maxims that just stick in your head. I think that the principles from this book are just going to be the same as in the other book, as in the book before that. It's these principles that are the same simple ones that we always learn about, and we simply need to apply them. This is what every single great person in history has done. They learned the simple things from the great people in history before them, and then they applied it in their lives. Anyway, let me know who else you want me to read about, who else you want me to do a lecture over, and I'm just excited to keep doing this. I love them. I love studying these people. I love studying greatness, and I love talking into the mic and about these lessons. I really do enjoy it, and this has definitely been one of the most interesting ones I've done. So, yeah. Anyway, that's it. See ya.
Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact.
I've lost my mind on this game, yeah. Like Vincent Van Gogh.
Every set that I did and more weights that I lifted, I get one step closer to turning that vision into reality.
Offer me money, offer me power. I don't care.
Dedicated his life to his art and lost his mind in the process.
Because everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you.
Celsius, you should sponsor me. I really like your drink.